Welcome to Cortez and the Discovery of Mexico by Steven Corwall, an historical account. Narrated by Ben Flanagan. Copyright 2023 by BrooksAudiobooks.com and Shadowplay Communications, LLC. All rights reserved. No reproduction in any form without written permission from the publisher. Visit BrooksAudiobooks.com for a special free audiobook offer. Cortez and the Discovery of Mexico by Chapter 1. In 1511, Diego, the son of Columbus, realizing that the gold mines of Hispaniola were almost depleted, opted to conquer the nearby island of Cuba, or Fernandina, as it was known, named in tribute to the King of Spain. The troop he dispatched to seize the island was led by Velázquez, a man his peers described as having exceptional military experience after serving for 17 years in European conflicts, also from a prestigious family and name, and driven by a desire for glory and wealth. Efficiently, Velázquez overtook the entire island and immediately turned his attention to the implementation of strategies for its advancement. He founded numerous communities, enticed farmers with free land grants and slaves, showed special interest in the cultivation of sugarcane, which became an important trade item in subsequent years, and above all, to the exploration of gold mines, which appeared to offer higher profits than those on Hispaniola. However, the takeover of Cuba was an inconsequential accomplishment for his ambition, as he would continue to be under the superior authority of Diego Columbus, a situation he wanted to change. He believed that making significant discoveries would afford him an autonomous rule. With this objective, he set his sights westward, where he had every reason to expect a vast mainland territory untouched by any European. Fortune played into his scheme. In 1517, Hernández de Cordova, a Spaniard, embarked on an expedition from Cuba via 3 ships to a nearby island with the intention of capturing slaves. Bad weather forced him onto land unexpectedly. On asking the locals about the country's name, they responded with Tectetan, which translates to "I do not understand you" in their dialect. The Spaniards misinterpreted this as the name of the region and corrupted it into Yucatan. Consequently, the peninsula of the mainland opposite Cuba, segregating the Caribbean Sea from the Gulf of Mexico, got its contemporary moniker. Cordova first shores at the northeastern tip of the peninsula, Cape Catoche, then navigated along the peninsula, halting at various locales, and ultimately reached the area of present-day Campeche, where the seawater shapes the Bay of Campeche. The brave Spaniards got involved in many intense face-offs with the locals, who were surprisingly more civilized and at the same time more belligerent than the other island inhabitants. They wore clothing made out of woven wool fabric. Their arsenal consisted of wooden swords sheathed with flint tips, spears, bows, arrows, and shields. They decked their faces in a variety of colors and ornamented their heads with bunches of feathers. These were the first Americans to build homes out of stone and cement. In their numerous encounters with these individuals, the Spaniards weren't always victorious. In one instance, they captured 2 Native American boys, bearing the Christian names Julian and Melchior. These captured boys proved highly beneficial as they acted as translators for the Spaniards in their later interactions with the Mexicans. One time, while they were ashore to refill their water casks, a group of 50 Native Americans came up to them, asking if their origins were where the sun rises. Upon receiving an affirmative response from the Spaniards, they were led to a stone temple, filled with a variety of unsettling deity images freshly splattered with blood. Suddenly, 2 men clad in white robes with long, dark, flowing hair emerged, each holding small clay incense burners, into which they tossed a type of resin. They guided the smoke in the direction of the Spaniards and commanded them, threatening them with death, to exit their territory immediately. Realizing staying would put them in serious peril, they complied and went back to their ships. In a separate situation, after they had disembarked, they found themselves surrounded by a huge crowd of hostile Native Americans. To escape back to their vessels, 47 Spaniards ended up getting killed, and many more were injured. Among the 70 injured was Cordova himself. After this catastrophe, they hastily retreated back to Cuba as fast as their ships could take them, where their leader passed away after delivering a full report to Velázquez on everything that had transpired. Velázquez was thrilled with the discoveries made in his honor and decided to continue them. He prepared 4 ships and chose a Grijalva, a person of significant competence and bravery, who Velázquez was confident in his integrity and sound decision-making, to lead them. Grijalva was clearly instructed to just focus on making discoveries, without settling colonies in the newly found places. Departing Cuba on May 1, 1518, Grijalva planned to head towards Yucatan, but the ocean currents redirected his path, leading him to land at Cape Catoche first. Following this, he discovered the island of Cozumel, located off the Yucatan coast. From there, he headed along the coast to Potonchan, where Hernandez had been brutally mishandled. The Spaniards were keen to set foot on land and retaliate for the catastrophe, and Grijalva granted that. The Native Americans, filled with pride and an attitude of defiance, and excited about this new chance, boldly attacked the Spaniards. However, they were repelled, and 200 of them paid with their lives for their recklessness, causing the rest to flee in widespread terror. Grijalva continued to explore the coast. He was repeatedly amazed by the sight of towns featuring stone and cement houses, which, at a glance, seemed even more impressive and well-constructed to the Spaniards than they actually were. The similarity of this region to Spain was so striking to them that it was named New Spain, a name that still stands today. Soon, they arrived at a river. The locals called it Tabasco, but the Spaniards renamed it Grijalva, honoring their leader. The surrounding area appeared so prosperous and densely populated that Grijalva was compelled to gather accurate information about it. So, he stepped on shore with his fully armed team. They were met by a swarm of armed Indians, who were loudly trying to stop their further progress. However, he disregarded their threats, marched his team within bowshot range, then paused, arranged his men for battle, and dispatched 2 Americans, Julian and Melchior, previously captives of Hernandez, to convey that his intention was not to harm them, but to benefit them, and that he was eager to reach a peaceful resolution. The Native Americans, having watched with awe at the uniformed lineup, the clothing, and weaponry of the Europeans, were totally taken aback by this announcement. Some of their chiefs bravely moved forward. Grijalva greeted them warmly, and, via interpreters, informed them that he and his sidekicks were loyal to a powerful king who governed all the lands where the sun rises. His king had dispatched him to command their allegiance to his rule, and he was eagerly awaiting their response. At this point, a soft buzz of chatter erupted among the Native Americans, which was silenced by one of their chiefs, who bravely responded on behalf of his tribe that it baffled them that the Europeans would speak of peace, yet demand compliance. They also found it puzzling that they were being foisted with a new ruler without probing whether they were discontent with their current one. Regarding the question of war or peace, he asserted he wasn't authorized to give a definitive response. That question had to be referred to his higher-ups. After uttering these words, he withdrew, leaving the Europeans somewhat stunned at this rational riposte. After a brief pause, he came back and informed Grijalva that his higher-ups didn't fear a war with the Europeans if it was unavoidable, as they hadn't lost the memory of what transpired at Potonchan. Nevertheless, they deemed peace a better option than war, and as a testament to this, he offered many essentials as gifts. Not long after this, the tribal leader himself showed up, devoid of weapons and accompanied by a small entourage. Following amiable exchanges from both sides, he retrieved from a basket golden items of varying types adorned with gems, and goods garnished with vividly colored feathers. He expressed to Grijalva his preference for peace, and that he brought these presents as proof of his words. Then, to circumvent any chance for confusion, he urged him to leave their lands as soon as possible. The European leader thanked the tribal leader for the courteous gesture by reciprocating with gifts, and assured he would respect his request as soon as he could set sail. After making their way for quite a bit along the shoreline, they arrived at an island brimming with stone homes and a temple. At the heart of this temple, which was accessible from all sides, they spotted various horrifying idols positioned around a slightly raised altar. 6 bodies lay nearby, which looked to have been sacrificed the previous night, according to the gruesomely prevalent local practice. The sight was so terrifying that the Spaniards named it Island of Sacrifice. All around, there were signs showing the widespread practice of human sacrifice in reverence to the island as gods. Dropping anchor at another island, named Culva by the locals, they discovered even more recently killed bodies, causing even the hardened Spanish soldiers to recoil from such barbarity. Grijalva dubbed this island Juan, and over time, this evolved into the now-known name of Sant Juan de Ulloa. Each place they explored revealed an ample presence of gold. The sight of numerous fertile areas along their route stirred a desire among the men to set up a colony. But Grijalva remained steadfast in executing Velázquez's orders. He claimed each land they visited in the name of their king. He stayed the course along the coast until reaching Panuco. When they tried to cross a river entrance there, a horde of Indians attacked them fiercely, forcing a grisly melee before they could be repelled. Afterward, as they tried to continue along the coast, opposing currents compelled them to head back to Cuba. On his return, he was met with harsh criticism from the irrational Governor Velázquez, who was upset Grijalva had not created a settlement in that resourceful area, despite specifically being instructed not to when he set out. Grijalva had dispatched one of his key officers, Pedro de Alvarado, with an impressive array of jewels, gold vessels, and adornments. These items had been bartered from the locals in exchange for European trinkets. He had also greatly discussed the wealth of the region. But when Grijalva returned after a 6-month hiatus, he found himself criticized for simply following the governor's orders. The humble, low-key guy took the undeserved criticism in stride. He deserves the distinction of being the first European sailor to step foot on Mexican land, paving the way for dialogue with the Aztecs. Chapter 2. Cortez' early years. His journey to San Domingo and establishment there, Cortez under Velázquez in Cuba. He prepares a fleet for the Mexico conquest. Velázquez, a driven but concurrently untrusting and inconsistent man, made a decision to expand on the substantial discoveries made under his name, keen on enjoying the bountiful rewards they held. For this purpose, he quickly assembled an imposing fleet. The next issue was, who would lead it? As he lacked the bravery to engage personally in a venture fraught with numerous perils and struggles, he was compelled to find another commander. Choosing the right person was challenging. One candidate appeared too spineless, another overstatedly brave, one too dim-witted, another too cunning. He keenly sought someone who would display not only necessary judgment and courage, but also unwavering loyalty to him and absolute obedience to his commands, one who could execute grand achievements while benefiting him greatly. Luckily, he found such an individual, perfectly suited for the mission, yet he didn't know how to leverage him. That individual was Cortez. Born to a distinguished family in 1485 in the small town of Medellin, in the Spanish region of Extremadura, was Hernando Cortes. From his early youth, he possessed extraordinary courage, relentless tenacity in surmounting challenges, an unvarying dynamic spirit, and a deep-seated ambition to stand out through significant accomplishments. As a child, Cortez was physically frail. At the age of 14, he was sent by his father, who had high expectations of his remarkable talents, to the University of Salamanca, with law as his intended field of study. His father envisioned a profession that promised a more favorable future for a hard-working young man than other fields. But the son was not aligned with his father's intentions. He did not show much interest in academia and returned home after his second year of study, causing great distress to his parents, as he didn't pursue any specific profession thereafter. Instead, he seemed drawn towards military life, especially one brimming with adventure. At that point in time, all attention was focused on the West Indies. and he shared the same focus. He chose to join the audacious individuals who braved all adversity and risks to add new territories to their home country and earn a significant reputation for themselves. He was 20 years old, 1504, when he left Spain and made his way to San Domingo. His bravery and unwavering spirit were tried harshly during his initial voyage. He faced countless dangers and challenges, but this vigorous, robust young man, who hadn't been sapped of physical and mental strength by laziness, femininity, and reckless indulgence, brushed them off. Labor was a joy for him, hunger and thirst trivial, and death, if necessary, was of little concern. The ship carrying Cortez was one among many docked at the Canary Islands, stocking up for their adventures, a common routine for all sea vessels making their way to the New World at the time. Its skipper was a greedy character, eager to reach the New World trade before the others to fetch a premium for his goods. He discreetly set sail under the cover of darkness, only to be caught by a violent storm that dismasted his ship, forcing him to return to the Canary Islands. The other shipmasters kindly waited for their disloyal colleague, but he managed to stealthily escape once more during the night. However, he lost track, faced harsh storms and unfavorable winds, and his ship was so severely tossed around that everyone aboard feared for their lives and were considerably irked with the instigator of their woes. Young Cortez, however, remained unperturbed by the imminent danger and cheerfully anticipated the future. Eventually, after aimless wandering, the ship reached its intended location. A disoriented dove landed on the mast. As it took flight, they followed its path and reached Hispaniola, where the other vessels had arrived much earlier and the captains had already sold their goods. Cortez arrived in San Domingo when Ovando was still in charge. His presence alone got him a warm welcome. He was attractive, had a friendly face, and was genuinely sociable with everyone, but it was his distinct character traits that made him even more likable. He was generous, lenient, and big-hearted, yet also cunning, visionary, and reserved. He never spoke ill of anyone, and was pleasant to chat with. He was always willing to do someone a favor, but didn't want any recognition. These admirable traits quickly made him popular. Right after his arrival, he paid a courtesy visit to the governor, but Ovando was away, busy with issues inland. Nonetheless, his secretary received him warmly, assuring him he could easily get plenty of land from Ovando to establish himself. Cortez responded, "I'm here to make money, not to work like a farmhand." Upon coming back, Ovando persuaded the young man to set aside his grand aspirations, at least temporarily. He assured him that settling as a farmer would lead to greater wealth than leaving it to random luck. Consequently, Cortez acquired land and a portion of Native Americans in the Azua settlement. His routine life was often interjected with thrilling exploits as a warrior, mainly when he joined forces with Velázquez in times of native uprisings. These activities increased his visibility to Ovando, who was very eager to keep him on board, but his daring nature demanded bigger adventures, leading him to request and receive permission to join Velázquez's mission to Cuba in 1511. Finally, he had the chance to showcase his bravery and dynamism. His rise was rapid. In a short while, he found himself in the vital role of alcalde of Santiago. Still, a fallout with Velázquez soon took place and could have had severe consequences had their friendship not been robust. Cortes, who wasn't the epitome of virtue, fell for an elite woman named Catalina Suarez. He had intended to marry her, but postponed it for so long that he called forth the governor's wrath. Their dispute caused a rift between him and his benefactor. Angered, Cortes planned to take his grievances before Velázquez's supervisor in Hispaniola. Other disgruntled people allied with him in this endeavor, and they decided to dispatch a messenger. Cortes was chosen since no one else would dare to clandestinely row the 18 miles to the neighboring island in an unprotected boat. But their plot was caught. Cortes was seized, shackled, and put in a secured detention. Some say Velázquez would have executed him if it weren't for the intercession of friends. Meanwhile, the daring Cortes didn't stay in captivity for long. He managed to escape his chains, break the window, and scamper off to a nearby church. By the era's norms, a refugee couldn't be captured in a sacred site. Velázquez had guards watching, but Cortes was caught when he ventured a little too far out. He was then moved to a ship set to sail to Hispaniola the next day, but luck was on his side. He broke free during the night, dove off the side of the ship into a boat, then plunged into the sea, swimming back to land. Running on fumes, he sought refuge in the same sanctuary, promising to marry Catalina Suarez if forgiven. Velázquez agreed. Cortes married Catalina, and the two settled their differences, leading to an even stronger friendship. When Alvarado came back raving about the latest finds on the mainland, and Grijalva also praised the bountiful western realm, Cortes was the guy selected to captain the fleet. He took on the role eagerly, and everyone involved in the voyage was pumped to have such a capable, brave, and well-qualified guy at the helm. Cortes was also thrilled with the chance to show his chops, pitched in all he had to ensure a good stock of mission essentials, and lent a hand to those of his colleagues who were too cash-strapped to get what they needed. Before the prep work in the harbour of Santiago was finished, Cortes slipped away, as he had gotten wind of Velázquez's plan to swipe the top dog role from him, afraid he might hog all the bragging rights as well as the profits from the project. His whole crew numbered 300 guys, and an additional 100 joined him from another part of Cuba, members of notable families, chomping at the bit for the prestige and infinite wealth the journey promised. The day Cortes set sail was November 18th, 1518. The first stop on their route was Trinidad, and next up was Havana, where they intended to pick up some more folks and additional supplies. For a considerable period, Velázquez seemed to be content with Cortes leading the expedition, despite the many gossips trying to turn him against Cortes. However, as soon as he watched Cortes sail off, he saw things differently. He thought, what if Cortes misuses his power, becomes defiant, and declares himself supreme ruler in the country he was assigned to conquer on Velázquez's behalf? A small group of Cortes's adversaries, constantly near him, noticed his disturbed state and doubled their attempts to fuel his envy, ultimately succeeding. Immediately, a messenger was dispatched to the mayor of Trinidad, instructing him to dismiss Cortes from his position upon his arrival. The mayor was ready to comply, but Cortes, who felt no guilt, didn't agree to step down. He assured the mayor that Velázquez's change of heart was due to a misunderstanding, and asked him to hold off on executing the order until he could correspond with the governor and receive a response. The mayor, unable to enforce his orders, agreed. Cortes then wrote to the governor, set sail promptly, and headed for Havana. He found himself waiting in Havana for a while, partially for backup, and partially to procure necessary items for such a significant expedition. Finally, everything was set. The navy consisted of 11 ships, the largest, 100 tons in size, no bigger than one of our dual-masted cargo vessels, served as the admiral's lead ship. The next 3 largest were of a load capacity of 78 tons, with the remainder being small, open boats. Cortes's team had expanded to 617, with roughly 100 as sailors and craftsmen, and the remainder as soldiers. Only 13 of them were armed with muskets, and 32 with crossbows. The rest wielded swords and spears, as firearms weren't widely used at the time. 16 horses, 10 tiny cannons or field artillery, along with 4 long, slim cannons known as falconets or culverins, out of style now, comprised the most critical part of the equipment. With this relatively inadequate gear, Cortes sailed to an undiscovered land to fight the powerful leader of Mexico, whose flourishing empire, including surrounding regions, surpassed all nations that the King of Spain ruled at that period. In the meanwhile, Velázquez was livid upon learning Cortes had set sail, despite his ban. He accused his delegates, who he had assigned to revoke the appointment, of treason. His anger was uncontainable, and he made robust arrangements to hinder Cortes from slipping away from Havana a second time. He dispatched one of his most reliable deputies with explicit orders to capture Cortes and transport him, shackled and heavily guarded, to Santiago. Luckily, Cortez got wind of the impending threat in plenty of time to secure himself. He quickly rounded up his troops, confident in their loyalty, outlined the threat they were facing, and asked for their thoughts. The unanimous answer was that he shouldn't concern himself with the unpredictable governor, and that he shouldn't forfeit his legal standing or deliver himself to such an unfair and suspicious adjudicator. They begged him, considering the significance of the mission, not to relinquish his leadership, assured him of their absolute trust in him, and voiced their readiness to follow him to death, in spite of any hurdles and hazards. Cortez proved responsive and open to any strategy that would aid him in achieving his end goal. After expressing gratitude to the soldiers for their agreement, he promptly commanded anchors to be lifted and set sail from Havana on February 10th, 1519. Chapter 3. Cortez is seen as a threat by the Tabasco locals and is thrust into a battle with them. He triumphs, and they yield. Cortez chose to follow the same path that Grijalva had ventured on ahead of him, thus marking the Cozumel island as his subsequent stop. Here, he found an opportunity to rescue a Spaniard who'd been stranded on the coast due to a shipwreck. Ever since then, this unfortunate man named Aguilar had been conducting his existence as a servant among the natives. Over the course of his 8-year stay, Aguilar had shed every trace of his European origin, assuming so profoundly the look, complexion, language, and lifestyle of the natives that it was a challenge to believe he was once a Spaniard. Just like the locals, he went about without clothing, his skin had a rich, brown tone, and his hair, in accordance with local custom, was twisted around his head in spirals. He toted an oar on his shoulder, held a bow in his hand, and a quiver rested on his back. All his belongings were tucked into a woven bag and consisted of his sustenance and an ancient prayer book which he pored over studiously. He'd become so distanced from his native language that comprehending him proved a significant challenge. According to his report, he was shipwrecked nearby with 19 others. 7 of his crewmates succumbed to hunger and fatigue. The rest were captured by the local chief, a brutal man who brutally killed 5 of them in religious rituals and kept the others in a type of cage, planning to fatten them up and then eat them. Luckily, they managed to escape. Helpless and in utter hopelessness, they roamed the woods, surviving on roots and herbs, until they eventually encountered some Native Americans who brought them to a friendly chief, a rival of the previous one. He treated them kindly, but made them perform difficult jobs every day. Most of them didn't last long, with only 2, Aguilar and Guerrero, outliving the others. They soon got the chance to perform significant tasks for the chief in his battles, which he greatly appreciated. Guerrero married a prominent Native American woman, was appointed a leader, and gradually became so Americanized that when the Spaniards arrived, he had no interest in altering his circumstances. He did not meet them, perhaps out of embarrassment. As Aguilar mentioned, he had adorned his nose and painted various parts of his body in the indigenous manner. Cortez hugged the unfortunate Aguilar, sharing his own cloak to cover Aguilar's bare body. As Aguilar had picked up the local language during his lengthy stay, Cortez was thrilled to have found him, hoping he would come in handy during future interactions with the locals. From Cozumel, he aimed for Tabasco, specifically where the Grijalva River flows into the sea. He anticipated a warm welcome, as Grijalva had received, but was let down. The sight of his vessels led the natives to switch into defense mode, resolved to bar him from reaching land. Cortez sent out Aguilar to negotiate, to no avail. The locals wouldn't entertain him, forcing him to return without achieving his goal. The blowback both surprised and displeased Cortez, as this wasn't how he envisioned the start of his conquest. His intent was to reach the Mexican Empire's neighboring territories as quickly as possible and kick off his efforts there. Alas, he found himself in the sticky situation of having to either yield to the locals' threats or instigate a conflict in this remote region. Such a battle, even if victorious, would inevitably consume time and lives he couldn't afford to lose. If he retreated, the natives would interpret it as cowardice, potentially inciting more trouble. Pondering this predicament led Cortez to conclude that an attack was his best option. As it was approaching nightfall, any immediate action was put off until the following day, with the night serving as the planning phase. At sunrise, everyone was called to action. Cortez set up his fleet in a semicircle. This formation was due to the coastline, and he started heading up the river keeping this formation. But prior to launching an attack, he had Aguilar relay a message to the locals. They could decide if he should be seen as a friend or a foe. Aguilar did as directed, but instead of quietly hearing him out, the natives signaled for combat, rowing their canoes towards the fleet. The encounter began with a fierce barrage of arrows and stones from the natives, causing significant distress to the passive Spaniards. In response, Cortez signaled for defense. A single gunshot from the main cannon was decisive. The natives, taken aback by the deafening boom and aghast at its ruinous impact, abandoned their canoes and plunged into the water, striving to evade by swimming all out. The Spanish ships pulled up to the shore, and Cortez and his team disembarked without any disruption. The battle, however, was not over yet. The natives, having abandoned their canoes, escaped into the bushes, where more of their fighters were hiding. They charged while Cortez was occupied, arranging his men for battle, attacking with arrows, spears and stones, all the while bellowing terrifying war cries. Cortez, however, remained unfazed and resumed aligning his soldiers until all were properly positioned for combat. They then charged relentlessly at the natives, advancing with remarkable composure across treacherous mires and thick vegetation towards the throng of the enemy, spreading death and fear in their path. The sight of an armed team with European weaponry was unprecedented and terrifying for the natives. They could not face it and hastily retreated. The enemy sprinted towards their fortified city, Tabasco. The city's defense was merely a lineup of poles embedded into the ground, much like our barricades, encompassing the city circularly. Both of the barrier's ends overlapped, leaving a single, twisty road leading into the city.